Have you all got your headsets on? It's a deep privilege for me to be here today in Latvia. This is my first visit to Latvia, and thank you so much for inviting me here. The nearest I've got to you in the past is Estonia, where I spoke at their national conference 2 years ago. And I think some of you in the room were at present when I last spoke. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm obviously from England, but what I want you to think of me this morning is I am a teacher, just like you. I love teaching. I'm passionate about teaching, and I work with teachers and I teach. I was teaching last week, and so I'm involved in the whole process of teaching, and therefore I have empathy for you. I know very little about your work in your schools. I'm visiting a school tomorrow, so I will see your work. For me, teachers are heroes. You are the most important people in society. The reason I say that is because you are sending messages to the future. What you say and how you are with your children, they will remember. They will remember mainly how you made them feel. Do you make your children feel sad? Do you make them feel positive and happy? What are the feelings you give to your children? That is so important. If you want 16 minutes of hearing me, you can listen to a TED talk I gave, which sums up really what the subject I'm talking about today is really about, values-based education. My work is based on research. I'm an academic as well as a teacher, and I worked with Oxford University to see whether what I talk about actually works in practice. In the 90s, I was working with the Australian government and a professor in Australia who then took what I was talking about and did a major piece of research in Australian schools. And it verified what I was saying was correct. So I'm very pleased about that. If I asked you what is the purpose of education, I wonder what you'd say. Is it to pass examinations? Or are there other meanings for education? The purpose of education. This is Singapore. I was helping the Singaporean government a few years ago, and they were really worried about parents because they were feeling their parents weren't spending enough time with their children because the parents were working, they thought, too much. So the schools then started to help the parents understand how children learn. They helped them understand how to relate to their children by visiting the school and going through the process of learning. So I believe that the purpose of education is the flourishing of humanity. How can each and every student in your schools flourish, be the best human being they could possibly be? I believe the world is at 5 minutes to midnight. We have just a few years to make huge changes, to make the changes so our planet will survive. These are the really big issues. That's why I believe international cooperation is really so important now, at a time when countries, my own included, is looking for more nationalistic behavior. So we need to help children think about what world are we adopting for the future. And I love talking to students because they are the ones who really understand what we are talking about. My story was that I was a teacher in the English system, and I gained promotion. I became a head teacher, director of a school, very young, 27 years of age. And then I went on to another school where I was the head teacher, and I learned the craft of teaching. I had watched great teachers, and I wanted to be like them. One teacher I remember, his name was Peter Long, and I was a student in his school, and I watched him, and I thought, wow, how can I be like Peter? What did Peter do? Number one, he was able to form relationships with children. He was able to meet them as human beings. Number two, he deeply listened to what the children were saying. He wasn't just imparting knowledge. He was an outstanding teacher. His pedagogy was wonderful. The children learned a lot. They learned the knowledge, the skills, information that they needed. So children in his school did exceptionally well. He seemed to touch children intellectually and also their hearts. He made that connection between our knowledge, the cognition, and also the heart, the skills that we need in order to be a confident human being. So I said, Neil, I want you to be like Peter and other teachers that I'd watched. I'm getting older now. My wife says it's nearly time I stopped going and giving talks. And she said, Neil, do you realize that you have probably visited more schools in the world than probably anybody else? Because you've traveled a lot. You've been so interested in seeing what's happening. So I've had the privilege to visit and see lots of you talking and working in schools. So I have a vision in my mind about what a good school is. And I left a very good job I had in the UK because I wanted to see if my ideas were going to work in practice. Could how I saw the future in education, could that work? And so I became a head teacher again at a school in Oxford in the UK, where I said to them, can we see if we can do things differently? They said, Neil, what do you want? And I said, well, I want the highest academic standards. I want our children to achieve as much as they can. If they're not academic, perhaps we can develop their skill base. If they're academic, let's see what we can do. But, I said, more importantly, I want them to be the best human beings they could possibly be. They said, how can we do that? I said, well, let's investigate values. Let's see if we gave the children values, we could actually help them to be better learners because they would be more engaged with their learning. So they said, how will we do that? What will we do? And so we started to think, well, let's start with our relationships with the children. How can we form even better relationships? Some of the teachers that I met at the school were like the cat in the photograph, like that. I said, well, is that the way you engage with children? Is that the way they will trust you? A good school, colleagues, is all about trust. If the adults in the school don't trust each other, you won't have an outstanding school. You have to have trust. You have to have collaboration. You have to be open to be working with colleagues. No longer can we be in a classroom and close the door and have our pupils and fear the outside world. We have to open our classroom, come out and find out and relate to each other. As a school staff, we started to observe each other, started to work with each other, and then the transformation started to happen. So good relationships, so important. That leads to something called unconditional positive regard. Unconditional. I was working with some of your colleagues yesterday, and I said, how can you tell a good teacher? There's one very simple way of doing it. You look at their eyes. You look at their eyes as I'm looking at your eyes, and I'm asking myself the question, do you have smiling eyes? Would you look at the person next to you and check out, have they got smiling eyes? Have a look. Have a look at the person. Are they smiling? I can tell who's not listening to me now. Thank you. Yes, you see, if you have smiling eyes, that shows that you're there, you're present. You're not carrying around the woes and problems. You're not just bringing your baggage to the classroom. You're there present with the children, and those children engage with you. When I ask teachers, children, who the best teachers are, they tell me the best teachers are those who like children, who we can trust, who we can engage with. That's what children say. So, having lovely eyes like Renee. Renee is an Australian teacher, and I observed her teaching, and she was outstanding. Grade 6 teacher. So, thinking about values, how do you do it? The first thing, we don't impose values on anybody. The school community thinks what values will help the children to be wonderful people and good learners. So the parents, the community meet together to decide that. You have some government values. Well, you draw those into your conversation. And then you draw these other values, which we call universal positive values, which then give the students a universal language in order to communicate. We communicate by values. So, quality teaching and learning is number one for a school. Looking at your pedagogy. Number two, your good relationships. If you do not like children, please will you resign your job today. Don't carry on, because the children need you to like them, all right? Reflective practices. In the workshop later, I will be talking about reflective practices. At West Kidlington School, we did something which at the time was revolutionary. We taught the children something which is now called mindfulness. But when I started doing it, it wasn't called that. People called it reflection, meditation. And I didn't like the word meditation because my community might have thought I was trying to make the children into little Buddhists or something. So we'd call it reflection. And what this simply meant was teaching the children that their internal world is really important to understand and to know their internal world. Why do I behave in the way that I do? Why do you behave in the way that you do? And so we started to teach the children that by going quietly inside, taking what we called a brain break, calming things down, then allowed them to be more engaged learners. And also we noticed something absolutely magical, that the children started to be able to self-regulate their behavior. so they were in control of themselves. If there's one book I always talk about, it's Viktor Frankl. His book, Man's Search for Meaning. Man's Search for Meaning. When I first started reading the book, it disturbed me because it was about something that I'd prefer not to think about. It was about Auschwitz concentration camp. But once I got into the book and understood his story, I realized that it was a story of hope for humanity. A story of hope. We do need the value of hope today. Frankl survived camp life. And he used later on in life lots of wisdom. One of the wisdom that he used that I often talk about is when he used Goethe's words. He said, "If you take man as he is, you make him worse. If you take man as he could be, you make him capable of becoming what he could be." So, colleagues, if you take a child as they are, misbehaving, not doing as you want, not learning properly, if you take that as they are, you actually make them worse. They feel you don't like them, you don't inspire them. But if you take them as you see they could be, you could see their potential. You take their lid off the potential. You say, yes, I can see you as you could be. You then, colleagues, make them capable of becoming what they could be. Latvia, you could make every child in your schools absolutely believing in themselves, not in an arrogant way, but they could believe that they could change themselves to be good learners, good people, contribute to society. That's what we did at West Kidlington School. People came and said, "How do you do this?" The children are so self-motivated. They're not at school because they've been told to be at school. They're there because they want to be. So help children to find their meaning and purpose. Do you ever stop to ask? Do you say to your children, "What's your meaning and purpose? Have a chat to me. Tell me what you think, and I will help you." Some of their purposes may not be realistic, but you can still fire their enthusiasm. And therefore you fill what I see in the world to be an existential vacuum. Young people, if they don't have a meaning and purpose, fill it with other stuff. One of the things we're filling our existential vacuum with is the mobile phone. We look at that all day. Parents now walk to school looking at their mobile phones and not engaging with their children. Other ways we fill that void: alcohol, drugs, excessive sex, etc. So we want a society, a world society, that does have a reason for its existence. And that's why we develop empathy in pupils. Empathy, being able to walk in the shoes of someone else, having that feeling. So your community has thought about the values. Your nation has thought about the values. A value is a principle that guides your thinking and your behavior. You all have values. You cannot be values neutral. So what values will your school help the children to imbibe? Will it be empathy? So we strengthen those values. This is a head teacher in the UK. Her name's Corrie. Corrie, a number of years ago, saw me and she said, "Neil, I've heard about values-based education. I would like to have it in our school, but I'm not sure it will work. The children are very challenging, and I'm not sure your approach will work, but we'll try." A few years later, she invited me to the school and she said, "We have totally transformed. I've now got learners who want to learn, teachers who love teaching." It transformed the teachers. You see, a values-based school can only work if you, all of you, decide this is the way to go forward. Your new curriculum, which I'm really excited about, helps you to develop in these ways. It gives you autonomy. It helps you to be the best teacher you can be. So a values-based school addresses those principles. So a value, this is a little boy who's, if I can get back, yeah, thank you. The little boy, he's working on a mosaic. Am I on the right screen? No, I'll go back one. Nope. There we are, here he is. Little boy working on a value with an artist. Artists, I think, are wonderful supporters of education. I've learned that people who are in drama, art, really have a great place and role to play in school. Art is often not seen as a high-status subject. I regret that, because it's the subject that helps us to find out who we are. So a value, as I said, is a principle which guides our behavior. Values-based education is when you take values and everything that you do in the school, all your school policies, all the ways you behave, how you run the school, the ways that teachers teach, everything, just everything is underpinned through values. These are values that are on a path that lead up to a school. I actually think they look like gravestones, but there we are. VBE, values-based education, focuses on universal, positive human values. Universal because they're in every country of the world, from Latvia to South America. Every country believes in the values that I'm talking about. They are inner values. They are innate values in every human being. Every human being has honesty, trust, cooperation, responsibility, happiness, joy, justice. We all have them inside of us. And what values-based education does is turn the volume up. Say, let's bring out these values, not limiting values. Limiting values are greed, jealousy, intolerance. Those are the values we don't want. So we look to these positive human values, which all people around the world agree about. What we don't agree about is how you interpret them in a society. So I always say you look for Aristotle's middle way. Aristotle said, look for the golden mean. If you take a word such as courage, what does that mean? Too much courage, and you've got arrogance, foolhardiness. Not enough courage, and you are timid, you are a coward. So in your school, you have to think as a staff, what do these words mean to us? Take respect. What does respect mean in your school or for you? If you have respect, question, can you shout at students if you have the value of respect? Remember that you model values. You are modeling values. If the student hears you shouting at them, they are learning, we don't have respect here. So values are really challenging for us school teachers because we have to hold the mirror up to ourselves and we have to say, what do I do? Do I model these values that the school and the country want? Or is my behavior based on fear? I shout because I can keep control, and then the students will do as I want. We have to let go of that fear. Fear drives negative behavior, and say, no, we'll try something different. I've worked with many colleagues who have found it quite difficult to let go of some of their habits. But when they have let go, they've said to me, wow, it's so much easier working with students now, and I'm enjoying my job more. So what you're giving the students, and this, my research at Oxford showed this, you're giving them an ethical vocabulary. You teach Latvian, you might teach English, but you also need to teach values in order for the children to have a new vocabulary. So you give them lots of these words, and you then get them to think about them. In secondary school, you will think about ethical dilemmas. How do our values? We've got climate change. Well, what are our values? What should we be doing to change things? Should we be encouraging our government to make sure there are more points for charging electric cars along the highway? How are we actually going to use our values in the future? So you're developing ethical intelligence. Howard Gardner in the States brought up 7 intelligences. I've added one more, which I think is the most important, which is ethical intelligence, based on universal values. Can you imagine a world where everybody had ethical intelligence? Can you imagine it? We would transform the world. Your children, your grandchildren would have a future, because we wouldn't have people running our countries who were interested in power, interested in corruption, making money for themselves. We would transform societies. This is my vision, that we can do that. And I'm sure that it is yours. So develop what I call self-leadership. Self-leadership is enabling your children, your students, to be in control of themselves. Not media controlling them, or their phone controlling them, but them controlling, so that they can be more aware. How many of you this morning are really awake? Really awake? Are you fully present in this room? Or is your brain thinking of something else? Thinking of your coffee, your lunch, probably. So, our role is a marvelous one. We can create a different atmosphere. A values-based school is calm, purposeful, and a happy place to be. Do you all want, as teachers, to live a long, healthy life? Do you want? Nod to me if you do. Well, if you take me seriously today and develop values-based education, I guarantee you will live longer. Because the world, you see, is going mad. The number one problem in the United Kingdom is the mental health of the people there. The mental health. So well-being is the top of the agenda. And I'm told in other countries it's the same. So does your school help with well-being and the mental health of your children, or are you doing the reverse? This is one of my former students who's working. I was talking at a conference in the United Kingdom, and I was working really hard to convince the audience that values-based education does what I say it does. And this girl, her name's Emma, put her hand up, and she was sitting somewhere at the back. And she came up the steps, and she walked up by my side, and she said, "Do you remember me, Dr. Hokss?" And I said, "Yes, you're Emma, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes. I just want to tell the audience that everything Dr. Hokss said actually is true. It does work. And that is the reason that I became a teacher, she said. The tears rolled down my face as I realized what she had said. Absolutely wonderful. So, thank you for listening. I've only given an introduction. I hope I fired you with enthusiasm to work with values work. May I thank the former speakers, because I didn't know what you were going to say, but I absolutely agreed with what you said. So thank you very much. Thank you.